Beijing reacts strongly to the controversial visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. What will all of this mean for China-U.S. relations? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, is making a highly controversial visit to Taiwan. She arrived there Tuesday evening local time. The visit comes just days after both the Chinese and U.S. presidents held a lengthy telephone conversation in which China's President Xi Jinping warned against any U.S. interference in Taiwan. Beijing sees the Pelosi visit as a provocation and has issued strong reaction. Here is some of what China's foreign ministry has said.
China's foreign ministry says the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives ignores China's strong opposition and visits Taiwan, violating the One China principle in the 3 China-U.S. joint communiques. The ministry says this has seriously damaged the political foundation of China-U.S. relations, infringed China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and undermined peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. It sends a wrong signal to separatist forces who seek Taiwan independence. China firmly opposes this and condemns this action and has issued a strong protest to the U.S. side. The foreign ministry says there is only one China and Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. It says the government of the People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government of China. And this was made clear in Resolution 2758. At the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1971. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China, 181 countries have established diplomatic relations with China based on the One China principle. The One China principle is recognized by the international community and the basic regulations in international relations. The foreign ministry says that in the joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1979, signed by China and the U.S. promised that the United States recognizes that the People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government of China. In this context, the American people will maintain cultural, commercial, and other unofficial exchanges with Taiwan. As a part of the U.S. government, the U.S. House of Representatives should abide by the One China principle and not conduct any official exchanges with Taiwan. China has always opposed any visit by U.S. lawmakers to Taiwan, and the U.S. administration has a responsibility to stop this. The ministry says that as the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Pelosi's visit violates U.S. promises and is a political provocation that effectively upgrades relations between the U.S. and Taiwan. China will never accept this.
There is lots to discuss, so let's get to it. Joining the discussion is Josef Gregory Mahoney. He is Professor of Politics and International Relations at East China Normal University in Shanghai. With us here from New York is Brian Becker. He is the Executive Director of the Answer Coalition and host of the Socialist Program podcast. Also joining the discussion from Tel Aviv is John Gong. He is Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Welcome to all of you to the show. And Josef Gregory Mahoney, let me start with you. What kind of fallout do you see from this very controversial visit by the United States Speaker to Taiwan? And what kind of damage does it do to China-U.S. relations?
Well, as we've already heard from Beijing, it seriously undermines the basic foundations of U.S.-China relations. I think the next question is, what kind of response are we going to see? Where some people expected to see a more powerful, perhaps even military response last night. I don't think that was likely. I think if we see something, it will be after she departs. But the bigger question are, what are the longer-term implications? And in this context, does it continue to erode China-U.S. relations? And I think certainly from Beijing's perspective, who comes next? Another high-level U.S. official, the president or vice president, leaders from Japan or other countries? So I think, this ultimately intensifies China's resolve, and whether it takes a week or a month or a year or longer. I think that resolve just got stronger. I think it just solidified public opinion in China even more firmly behind the government. And so, unfortunately, I see all of this moving in a direction, as Beijing describes, of increasing insecurity.
All right, we are joined now by Victor Ga. He is an international relations expert and chair professor at Soochow University. He joins us from Beijing. Victor, as we've been reporting, the House Speaker from the United States, Nancy Pelosi, she is now in Taiwan. There's been very sharp reaction from the Chinese. The Ministry of Defense issued a very strongly worded statement condemning the visit, which it says violates the One China principle. And the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, says, and I'm quoting here, it says that it will protect the Taiwan Straits. It plans to conduct military exercises and training activities around the island this week. These include live fire drills in its maritime areas and airspace. During this period, it says the entry of vessels and aircraft in relevant areas is prohibited. So, Victor, how do you see the Chinese response unfold in the days and weeks ahead?
Well, first of all, Nancy Pelosi is in Taiwan right now as we speak, and she has been condemned as troublemaker in chief by China in the cross-strait relations. And China has rarely condemned anyone as sternly as it has been doing against Nancy Pelosi for violating the One China policy and threatened all kinds of consequences. Therefore, indeed, last night, before her landing in Taipei, there is a lot of nervousness in China, as well as in Taiwan, China's Taiwan province, as well as in this part of the world. Eventually, I think after her landing, Chinese government, through various entities like the Foreign Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the State Council, Taiwan Affairs Office, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, the CPPCC, you name it, they all issued one condemnation after another. Now, it rarely happens in more recent Chinese history. All this indicates that China is very serious about this condemning the violation by Nancy Pelosi and her delegation of the One China policy, and China will do something. Now, I would suppose China will do several things. One, on the personal level, there will be sanctions against Nancy Pelosi and those who traveled with her to Taiwan for violating the One China policy, for example, banning them for life from entering into China, China's Hong Kong, Macau, and eventually Taiwan province after its reunification with China, forbidding them to do any business with interests in China's mainland, China's Hong Kong, China's Macau, and eventually with Taiwan province after its reunification. Now, secondly, there will be very stern warnings by the Chinese government against the U.S. government. The U.S. ambassador in China, Nicholas Burns, may be summoned to the Chinese Foreign Ministry for firm lecturing about this particular issue. And then, I'm afraid, China will demonstrate to the United States about their indignation about this visit by Nancy Pelosi. China-U.S. relations will suffer the consequences, and it will be very, very difficult, at least for the immediate future to come, to handle China-U.S. relations. The damage to China-U.S. relations may be long-standing, and it will take quite some time to really take over all these overhang from this highly damaging visit to Taiwan by Nancy Pelosi.
Victor, in fact, the United States ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, has already been summoned to the foreign ministry. He was summoned to the foreign ministry by the vice foreign minister, Xi Feng. In terms of diplomatic protocol or diplomatic conduct, how serious is this?
I think this is very serious, mainly because President Biden and President Xi Jinping just now had a phone call about several days ago, and the people in China, as well as elsewhere, believe that they must have talked about Nancy Pelosi's proposed visit, and the expectation is that some assurances must have been given to the Chinese side, because otherwise President Xi Jinping himself or the Chinese side would not have decided to proceed with this phone summit, as we call it. But now everything turned out to be just the opposite. And despite of Chinese warnings, Nancy Pelosi proceeded with her visit. And then her visit to Taiwan took place also against presidential counseling against it by Biden, as well as Pentagon's counseling against her visit to Taiwan. So this is really very serious. I think the damage will be long-standing.
Brian Becker, this is being seen by China as a very serious provocation. What do you think is behind this visit?
Well, it's important to actually read what Nancy Pelosi said about why she went to Taiwan. There's an op-ed, an opinion piece that she wrote, or her aides wrote, but it's under her signature, that's in the Washington Post just in the last few hours. In it, she cites the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, and that was the act that was signed following the second Shanghai Community, or the second reaffirmation of the Shanghai Communique in 1979 when Deng Xiaoping met with Jimmy Carter. She said, in the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, the U.S. vows for the defense of Taiwan, vows for the defense of Taiwan. And then as you read on in the op-ed, she contextualizes her trip to Taiwan with her recent visit to Kiev and her meeting with Zelensky at the moment that Ukraine and Russia are at war. So Nancy Pelosi has gratuitously carried out what the Chinese are calling a strategic level provocation in violation of the One China policy, in violation of the Shanghai Communique. And the reason that she's doing it, and I think it's with actually the blessing of the Biden administration and the Pentagon, I don't really think Nancy Pelosi has the ability to go completely on her own here. What she's doing basically is escalating the conflict between the United States and China and putting it in the context of an actual real war that's taking place in the territory of Ukraine. And I think this is preparation for the next step in the major power conflict strategy that the U.S. adopted as a Pentagon quadrennial report in 2018, and which has emerged now as the consensus position of the U.S. This is, in fact, playing with fire. The American people don't want this. The last thing we need in the United States is another war. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, before that, Vietnam and Korea. I mean, this has to stop. The American people have real problems, and the last thing they need is an unnecessary confrontation with China, and that's what Nancy Pelosi is stoking.
Right, and Brian, when you say she is escalating the conflict, to what end? I mean, do you see a possible military confrontation as inevitable?
Well, I think the goal here is to either make it appear that China is weak, that the Xi Jinping government is weak because it didn't follow through with an excessive confrontation, and I'm glad they did not or haven't so far, either to make the Chinese government look weak in front of its own people, and also to make the record that there's almost an inevitable military confrontation coming between China and Taiwan, and that the United States is on the side of Taiwan. It's just like in Ukraine, where the U.S. NATO expansion provoked a crisis. Then the Russians responded, and then the U.S. could say that it was coming to the defense of Ukraine as an act of self-defense against a larger country. So it's going in the direction of actual confrontation in the Pacific region. And unfortunately, the Asia pivot, like the earlier pivots that America has made to Asia, has the danger of a catastrophic, not only regional war, but global confrontation.
John Gong, this visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, it comes at a crucial time in the relationship between China and the United States. I mean, these are two of the biggest economies in the world. And if we look at the situation right now, there are a number of global issues to contend with. I mean, we've seen the Ukraine conflict is continuing right now. There's inflation, there are supply chain issues, tariffs, food and energy price hikes as well. Isn't this rise in tensions going to make things a lot worse?
Well, it's make all these things, go to the drain, I would say. Let me first say that I'm not quite convinced that the Pentagon, Biden administration were all into this sort of doing a deliberate provocation towards Beijing. I think what really happened is probably the Biden administration just didn't handle this very well. It put himself in a corner. It was caught in the middle. On one hand, I truly believe that Biden and people at the Pentagon probably don't want Nancy Pelosi to go. But on the other hand, the Biden administration is also under a lot of political pressure. He doesn't want to be shown to the American people that he's weak to China. So he's sort of caught in the middle. This matter, it was just very badly handled from the very beginning up to this point that it will be, in my view, losers on both ends. It's not going to be good for both ends, and China certainly is going to respond. I think if you read carefully the statement from the Deputy Foreign Minister, when Burns was called, he said it very clearly. He said, "We will do something, and China means what it says."
Yeah.
So in the end, who is actually going to really suffer from this? I think still jury's out there. China has just, as you said, announced a live fire military naval drill practically outside the two ports of Taiwan.
Right.
And I think it's not just the United States is going to pay, for this fact. Also, for the things you've just mentioned, that they're going to lose all this cooperation from China on a range of issues. I think more importantly here is that Taiwan is going to pay, and it's going to pay more about this, and it's going to pay probably perpetually, in my view, as we move forward.
John, just on the point,
So I think.
Just on the point of Biden trying to avoid looking weak towards China, I mean, isn't he already looking weak? Because he's told Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, not to go. They belong to the same party, but she has said, "I am going, no matter what you feel about it."
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it looks very bizarre to me that, exactly like you said, they're of the same Democratic Party. He went on record in public saying that, I don't think, basically he's saying, I don't think it's a good idea to go. And eventually he didn't stop her.
Yeah. Victor Gao.
So it's just very, very, very bizarre to me.
All right. Victor Gao, there's been more response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he stressed, and I'm quoting him here, he says, "The one China principle is the consensus of the international community, the political foundation of China's exchanges with other countries, the center of China's core interests, and the red and bottom line that cannot be crossed." Do you believe, Victor, that the one China policy is in jeopardy right now? And what happens if that quote-unquote red line is crossed?
First of all, the one China policy seems to be hollowed out by the United States, including by Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taipei as we speak. Secondly, I think we all need to pause and ask an additional question. That is, the United States now is claiming that China, or the People's Republic of China, has never been running Taiwan. Seemingly, it had a point. However, we need to ask, what caused this? It was caused by the fact that there was a civil war in China back in 1949. Yeah. And that civil war gave rise to the establishment of the People's Republic of China in China's mainland, and the nationalist government under Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek fled China's mainland to Taiwan, and they stayed there ever since. So the real nature of the issue of the cross-strait relations now is the unfinished civil war in China. Now, whatever the United States is doing, including whatever Nancy Pelosi is doing, is really pushing for the resurrection of the unfinished civil war. Now, if something happens, it will not be mainland's invasion of Taiwan, because they are part of the same country. They are part of China. So the unfinished civil war may be resurrected, and the United States actually betted on the wrong horse in 1949. They wanted to shift to the PRC in 1979. Right. And if the United States really want to play with fire and trigger the resurrection of the unfinished civil war again, then they need to make a fundamental choice whether they really bet with Taiwan in the unfinished civil war, or they do something more reasonable, more rational for the benefit of the American people. I think this choice is daunting for America right now. They cannot take it and have it at the same time. They cannot have the cake and eat it at the same time. They cannot create the impression that on two sides of the Taiwan Strait, there is one country on the left side of the strait, and there is another country on the other side of the strait. This is the daunting challenge we are faced with for the United States, for the rest of the world.
Okay. Joseph Gregory Mahoney, I want to get back to something that Brian Becker was talking about a moment ago, and that is the action by Nancy Pelosi is, as he put it, a strategic provocation. And I'm going to go beyond that. If we look and we go back to the Obama administration, when he talked about the pivot to Asia, since then we've seen the creation of AUKUS, which is this security alliance which groups the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia. Then we've had the Quad formation as well. How do you see it?
Well, I agree with Victor, and certainly the position in Beijing that Biden has, on his own accord, hollowed out the one China policy. And in this context, Nancy Pelosi's visit, whether or not it's coordinated by the White House, is certainly part of a general trend. We've seen the hollowing out of the principle of strategic ambiguity, his characterization of China as a strategic rival, his pressing NATO to consider China an adversary. You mentioned his bloc building in Asia with AUKUS, including proliferating nuclear submarines to Australia. He's repeatedly meddled in China's affairs in Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, and of course Taiwan. He's admitted that U.S. troops are in Taipei. He's tried to draw China's immediate neighbors into, as you noted, the Indo-Pacific Quad, the so-called Indo-Pacific Quad. He's encouraging Japan to increase military capabilities and supporting Seoul, the new leader in Seoul, to upgrade a controversial missile system. While asserting that the U.S. will come to Taiwan's defense, at times equivocating on the one China policy in various statements that don't always reconcile. All of these collectively represent, I think, several red lines that have been crossed from Beijing's perspective. And I think there is a genuine concern that the very foundation of the China-U.S. relationship is now at risk. And I think, to go back to an earlier point, there's always been sort of this, since Biden took office, there's been this very schizophrenic and philosophy, when I say schizoid approach. On the one hand, you're going to treat China as an adversary. You're going to bring all of these weapons and dangers to China's door, but at the same time, you want to act serious about talking with China about cooperating on climate change, an existential issue facing all of this. You want to ask China, as Biden did in the phone call a few days ago, to help control the price of oil. Another issue that's a very desperate issue for a lot of Americans, and certainly a key sensitivity for Biden's own popularity with inflation. So, I don't know how we reconcile all of this, but it's really quite illogical.
Brian Becker, if we look at the United States right now, it's facing enormous domestic challenges, things like inflation, a slowing economy as well. There's a whole host of other issues that we can talk about, gun violence, police brutality, etc. Yet there are voices within the United States, among the political class and especially the media, that's going gung-ho for this confrontation. How does one explain this?
Right, it's kind of the politics of mass distraction. I mean, the American society is faced with gridlock within Congress. The infrastructure is really truly crumbling, even though it's a very rich country. We have, half the population lives either in poverty or pretty close to poverty. We have an inflation rate of 9%. People are paying double what they were paying a year ago at the gas pump. There's political and cultural sort of social strife that's growing. Abortion rights have been eliminated by 6 individuals on the Supreme Court. With all of these social and political and economic problems, isn't it a long tried and true trick by politicians, especially from the ruling party, to distract people's attention? What better way than to create an international crisis, maybe even a war crisis. But for the American people, this isn't going to sell. This isn't going to work with American people who are actually suffering right now.
Right.
1 million dead from COVID. I mean, that's the contradiction here is the U.S. elites are going in the direction of another military confrontation. We had Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Libya, and now China. I mean, this is obscene and absurd, but this is what America is really good at, apparently, is having unanimity at the top only when it comes to military confrontation.
John Gong, the Chinese news agency Xinhua, it reported that China strongly urges the United States to stop playing the Taiwan card and using Taiwan to contain China. John, is that what the United States is up to here, trying to contain China, especially China's economic rise?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I think the China policy for the current and previous administration, to some extent, I think starting from Obama as well, is all about containing China, you know, in all range of issues, politically, economically, militarily. I mean, you look at for example, the decoupling that's going on initiated by Donald Trump and very much followed through, I think, by the Biden administration. It's all about that. So this is no news to us. But I think what China is trying to say is that as long as, you know, there's some common grounds between the two countries, as long as at least Washington respects Beijing's stance on Taiwan, which is, you know, the core of the core, in my view, in this bilateral relationship, we can still work together. I think, you know, China has showed a lot of goodwill, especially on this war on Ukraine. I think Washington hasn't been complaining about China assisting or cooperating with Moscow on Ukraine. But all of this is going to the drain right now.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, and thanks to all of you for being with us. Time has caught up with us. You've been watching The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.